Many in the MAGA and MAHA coalition, the America First coalition, are finding themselves a little bit disgruntled as of late as they watch the president that they elected on a mandate that was supposed to be focusing on securing the border and withdrawing America's military presence from the world, suddenly engaging in all sorts of military strikes with Iran supporting Israel, are of course known as our greatest ally. And although, to be sure, there are many in the conservative and neocon establishment who are cheering on the president, there are many who feel like they've been handed a raw deal. And so thus begs the question that many who become politically homeless or disenfranchised with the two-party system often ask, is there an alternative? Is there a political movement or a party that can usher in something different, that can advocate for true limited government and the values of our founding fathers? And one party already exists and claims that it can do that, and that is, of course, the Libertarian Party. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight here in the Green Room. Hello, everyone. I am coming to you not exactly live. This would be a pre-recorded conversation, but I'm Jacob Winnegrad, and I am the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute. And this is, of course, part of our Christians for Liberty network. Please make sure that you hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't already. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that I'm about to have with our guest for tonight or today, whenever I end up releasing this. I usually do these at night, so it's a little bit, and I'm recording this at night, but I might release it earlier in the day, who knows. But our guest for this conversation, for this episode, is the semi-recently appointed new chair of the Libertarian Party or Libertarian National Committee, and that is Steven Michaela, and I'm going to bring him up onto the stage now. There we go. Steven, thanks for being with me here. We're recording this pretty late on my end, but that's fine. I have a bit of a night owl, and I'm just glad we had a little bit of trouble getting this organized just because we're both busy and we both have young kids to deal with, but I'm glad we were able to get it going, and thanks for being here. Could you take a moment just to introduce yourself? And I've never had you on any of our shows here at LCI, so we have to do the obligatory Libertarian podcast bit where we're sitting in the AA room and we ask each other, so when did you first become a libertarian? We're recovering statists who used to be addicted to centralized power and Keynesian economics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Jacob, so much for having me on. And I appreciate you doing this late at night and kind of working around my schedule. I had to put my daughter to bed. You know how that goes. So when did I become a libertarian? And I think that starts probably around my mid-teens. Around my mid-teens, I knew I wasn't Republican. I knew I wasn't Democrat. I started to get into some material that kind of changed the way I was thinking. I watched a documentary called Zeitgeist. I'm sure some of you guys know that documentary. That took me down some rabbit holes, but ultimately I found some foundation on G. Edward Griffith's work, The Creature from Jekyll Island, about the Federal Reserve in 1913, got involved with Freedom Force International, which is G. Edward Griffin's website. Back then, there was a Project Red Pill. We'd make these DVDs and hand them out to friends and people that we knew. So had all these documentaries on them, Yuri Bezmenov and the Soviet Union, From Freedom to Fascism, and all this kind of material. So I got into a lot of reading. I got into a lot of documentary watching, and I realized I was an individualist. And I learned that there was individualism and there was collectivism. And I supported Ron Paul, even though I wasn't able to vote in his first time around. And when I went to college at FIU, I ended up joining Young Americans for Liberty. And from there, I also went to Paul Fest in Tampa, saw Gary Johnson, who was a libertarian candidate at the time. And I realized, wow, look at this platform. It seems to align with what I'm aligned with. I'm an individualist. This Libertarian Party seems pretty cool. And I became a card-carrying libertarian member, got involved with the Rothbardian Circle at FIU, met a lot of anarcho-capitalists and Mises Institute graduates, solid group, went on to join the Libertarian Party of Florida, created the Libertarian Party of Florida Keys with a buddy, Mike Kane, who actually got me formally involved in the party. Went on to become a Region 14 rep for the state of Florida, and then eventually I became treasurer and then chair for 4 years. I joined in 2016 the Libertarian National Committee as Region 2 alternate. And then I eventually became at-large, and as of about 3 months ago, chairman of the board. Through all this, I became a libertarian. Back in the day, I did a little bit of work for We Are Change and some journalism and stuff like that. So I've had my hands in the movement for a while, did some stuff with cryptocurrency. So I've always been around the libertarian sphere, so to speak. And yeah, I'm honored and privileged to be the chairman of the Libertarian National Committee. And that's how I got to be where I'm at today. That's the nutshell version.
Man, I haven't heard of that. People mentioned the Zeitgeist documentary in a long time, man. That's some old stuff, right? What was that guy's name? I forget his name. Was it Peter?
Oh man, it's some drummer or some guy in a band. I don't know if I'd recommend that documentary to anybody today. But when you're like 14 years old, it's quite a shell shock.
Yeah. No, did you kind of like a blast to the past when you said that? No, and obviously standard disclaimer here that you guys are probably used to hearing, probably tired of hearing, but we have to say it, that we here at LCI don't make any official endorsements or recommendations on how you vote or who you vote for, what parties you're registered for, anything like that. But of course, we're libertarians, and the Libertarian Party bears the name Libertarian. So we're often curious to learn what the Libertarian Party is doing, what they're advocating for. People who know me know that I actually spent a lot of time in the party, more on the grassroots level at my state here in Pennsylvania, and I joined via the Mises Caucus. And of course, anyone who's been paying attention knows that the Mises Caucus came in, and there was the takeover, the Reno reset, and then just a lot of stuff that's happened, some highs, some lows. Steven, what is your take on the current status of the party kind of after really, it feels like ever since the end of 2016, after Gary Johnson, that the party's been just in this quagmire of internal conflict. And I still see, some of the like remnants of that when I look around. But I also just get the sense that all the different factions still seem to exist, but maybe I'm seeing a little bit, and I'm also a hopeless optimist, so I could be reading into it, but I am seeing what seems to be like a little bit of people realizing that this internal fighting that's been going on for years isn't perhaps the most productive, and that we're not always going to agree on, listen, there's always going to be divides, right? Like anarchist, minarchist, conservative or more libertine, Ron Paul or Gary Johnson or what have you. There's different flavors, right? But there's still a lot more we agree with each other than we disagree. And I'm starting to see some of those bridges to have more collaborative work amongst these different factions of libertarians be built. Do you see the same thing? Do you think there's hope that libertarians can unite as much as libertarians can and start to be a more effective united force against the two-party system and the warmongers that we live under?
I think so. And I'm optimistic myself, and maybe to a fault, but I think it's grounded in reality. Because one of the cool things with the Libertarian Party, in my view, is that it's always been a place that's been a diverse nexus of Americans and different cultures and subcultures. So you have Christians in one corner, maybe you have people that like to go to EDM raves in the summertime or whatever. You've got people of all walks of life, business people, more hippie types. You've got cowboys, you've got rednecks, you've got all types of people from all different stripes and walks of life coming together under one political umbrella, which I find very interesting and somewhat unique. Because as far as I'm concerned, if you're a libertarian, if you believe in the core tenets of freedom and individualism, you understand that government is just there to protect life, liberty, and property. You don't have to agree with other people on other subjects. As Christians, we may have more conservative views, we may not agree with certain social lifestyles or things like that, agree with certain social issues. And I'm Christian myself, although I'm probably more open on social issues than most, or the way people live their lives, so to speak. But at the same time, I think as long as we respect each other as human beings, we don't have to necessarily agree with each other in how they want to live. And that's the basis of libertarianism. We're a political philosophy. We're not necessarily a social philosophy or an ethical philosophy, although we are to some degree. And to that point, we're going to have some people that are a little bit more single issue when it comes to economic issues, or more single issue when it comes to maybe prioritizing certain social issues or social concerns. And there's a big cross between both. Going back to 2016 or so, that's actually when I joined the LNC formally. We've had a schism in the party probably since 2020-ish, when the Mises caucus came in. I was Florida state chair at the time, and we had a lot of new blood come in, a lot of Mises folks. And we had our old guard, we had the new people come in, a lot of young guys and gals. And so if you're in charge, they're kind of like, why do I trust you? Why should you be in charge? Why should I listen to you? And they sized me up, and for what it's worth. And there's always going to be a little bit of friction when you're dealing with people, and they had to earn some respect, and I earned respect towards them. And we all ended up working really well together and accomplishing a lot. And the old guard got with the new guard. People learned from each other. We have a lot of those same people involved today, some really hard workers. And I think it was a net positive for the Libertarian Party of Florida and for the Mises Caucus and the folks there. So that was at least a unique situation where I think it worked out. In other states, it might not have been that way. At least for me in that scenario, it made it work. And I think ultimately what works, or how you make a diverse group of people work together, is you have to have a strong leader, or somebody who can sit people in a room and say, look, what are our goals? What are the common things we actually want to accomplish and set out to do? If we agree on what the goals are, then it doesn't matter what our differences are, because we agree on the goal. So if we're all just focused on the goal, then it really becomes a matter of who's actually helping us get there and who's not. And folks don't want to be the ones that don't want to be the ones that are fighting against the unified goal. So I think there is hope.
So I agree with a lot of what you said there. I think what you said, though, begs a natural follow-up question, which is, what is the goals of the Libertarian Party? Or can we even say that there is a centralized goal here? Because the Libertarian Party is a bit weird in that, like, when you think about the Republican and Democratic parties, you don't usually think about the Democratic Party of Texas and Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. But the Libertarian Party, you do get, at least with a lot of the state parties, a bit of a unique personality and even sometimes unique strategies, right? On the polar end, you have the Libertarian Party of Louisiana, which kind of takes more of a bent towards what I would label as like more progressive or libertine social issues, which are still a libertarian framework of non-aggression and respecting individual autonomy, but they wrap it in a certain wrapper, so to speak. And then on the flip side, you have the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire, which, even though I consider myself more of a right-wing libertarian, often pushes that to ends that even I'm going like, I don't know if that's quite the right approach. Some of the messaging sometimes I think goes a little bit too far, but part of it, beyond just the messaging, which I do want to talk about also a little bit with you, but there seems to be different ideas about how to use the Libertarian Party, both its state affiliates and the national party and the presidential campaign. That was one of the more controversial things that your predecessor, Angela McArdle, did with the inviting Trump to the convention, and then doing the Rescue the Republic stuff, and things that, now, me as an individual, I was largely supportive of, because I thought that it was interesting that Trump had all this, seemed like just non-regime blood infused into his support team and potential admin with Tulsi Gabbard and Vivek and Elon and RFK Jr. And now, since then, I don't want to get into a tangent, since then, the swamp seems to have won. But at least at the time, it seemed like, okay, this is interesting, right? People have called this the Kingmaker strategy. And say what you want about everything else, but Ross Ulbricht is a free man now. And it seems fair to say that the Libertarian Party played some kind of role in that. And I don't know any libertarian, even the ones who are the most diehard anti-Mises, anti-Angela people, who are like not thrilled with the fact that Ross Ulbricht is a free man. We're all happy about that. But it does raise questions of, okay, so what is the goal of the Libertarian Party? Is it just the plumb line, we're a political party, we're here to run candidates? Is it we're a third party, so we have to play the political game a little bit differently to try to influence things on the federal level and then also state and local as well? What is your take on that as chair, insofar as I know you're not like and that this, I guess it's almost a two-part question. What do you think the goal of the role of the party is, and what is your role as chair in facilitating that? Because there's some nuance there as well in terms of how hands-on a chair wants to be in terms of dictating or trying to mold the party in a certain way versus just saying, hey, I'll do whatever you guys want me to do. That's how, when I've chaired my county affiliate, I would just show up and be like, what do you guys want me to do? I'm just here to, that was always my approach, but everyone does it differently. So I'm curious to get your takes on both those questions.
No, very good questions and good points. I think first off, the Libertarian Party is made for three things, in my opinion. Number one is to run candidates in order to gain political power. We're a political party. We want power, and I can go on a whole tangent about that in a minute. Number two is spreading the philosophy. We have this beautiful libertarian philosophy. There's libertarian parties all around the world. That one just opened up, as a matter of fact, this past week in Paraguay. There's a Libertarian Party in Venezuela, in Russia, in Cuba, in Canada, the United Kingdom, and India even just recently opened up one. So this libertarian brand is a franchise that's being opened up all around the world. And we're the original mover and shaker. We're the Libertarian Party USA. They all look up to us, and we do have a big influence on American politics as far as what the libertarian philosophy is and pushing that, whether people like it or not. And that's why I think we need to be good apologists and good evangelicals, or whatever, however the word is said, for liberty. We have to be able to talk about the philosophy and explain it. We have to be good ambassadors for the brand. We need to be the ones who are putting a good face on it and ultimately explaining it in a way that makes sense to people that have never heard about it. So that's number two. And number three is we should be pushing legislation. So right now we're pushing Defend the Guard, which is legislation that would keep National Guard troops in states that pass it in that state unless there is a formal declaration of war from Congress. So they can't be deployed overseas or any of these wars or anything like that unless there's a formal declaration of war. So we've been very involved with the Defend the Guard team. It's actually something the Mises Caucus had been pushing, and we formally adopted that recently, in August, somewhat recently, back in August of last year. So it's been something we've been pushing hard. So to go back to running candidates, we are working on Project Decentralized Revolution, which is a project to field 500 plus libertarian candidates nationwide in local level elections. So our goal is to put people into local office where it's winnable. And depending on the statistics, libertarians win about 30 to 50% of the time. And there's a real opportunity for us to be at parity with the Democrats and Republicans long term through this type of strategy. Because if we can build local dominance, regional dominance, and get candidates elected, we can start to really dig our teeth in, and it's a lot easier to defend than it is to attack. So once you start building that out, taking over city councils, county councils, sheriffs, etc., there's real power in that. The all two parties start to get really scared. And the Democratic Party right now is in a very chaotic mess. I think they're in a lot worse shape than we are, to be honest. They're going bankrupt. They're basically going through a whole schism. We're in the recovery phase of that kind of schism, but I think we're further along than they are. They're still in the midst of it, and they have a lot more to lose than we do. So that's where that is. And on the topic of political power, I just want to touch on really briefly. I think it's something that needs to be said because culturally, you listen to a lot of libertarians, and don't get me wrong, I get it. They want to be in this kind of book club where, hey, I'm going to go have my buddies, have a few beers, talk about Rothbard and Mises and all that kind of stuff, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I love doing it. We should still do it. But the focus needs to be on where can we sink our teeth in? Where can we gain a footing to gain more and more political power in order to be the change you wish to see? There's a saying through Freedom Force, Impotentes defender libertatem non passant, which translates to those without power cannot defend freedom. And I think in order to attain that goal of getting political power, to throw the ring in the fire, so to speak, we need to be, of course, very focused and diligent. And we have a really Spartan budget to do things on compared to the old two parties. And we have to play the game asymmetrically because the cards are stacked against us. We're fighting ballot access laws just to even get on the ballot, not even let alone win the race. We're underfunded, we're undersized. And that's where I think my role as chair comes in a little bit, is I can say, okay, what's the main goal the LNC set recently? It was fundraising and membership. Okay. So I've been talking to some folks that were in charge around the late 90s, early 2000s, Jim Babka, Perry Willis, and some others I spoke to during Project Archimedes. Now, Archimedes was essentially a membership drive that was mostly done through direct mail, and it was done through lists from like Reason Magazine and other libertarian leading lists They were able to get to 30,000 members and $3 million a year for the LNC back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So probably worth a lot more in today's money. We're probably talking double, maybe more than that now.
Yep.
We're about a third of where we were in membership compared to 25 years ago. We've done this, but overall, it's been a downward trend. And so I've talked to staff. We're basically dropping everything that's not fundraising related. We're focusing primarily on membership and fundraising through Archimedes 2.0. We're working with the data company to get data on 700,000 registered libertarians in the United States out of 33 states that have voter registration. And we're going to target every single one of those people to try to get them to come in, join the Libertarian Party. There's people that already call themselves libertarians, but we're going to really try to reach out to them and get them to join, become a member, donate, get involved, run for office, become an affiliate member, become a state party member, and get engaged. And I think the main thing we need to do to focus on actually being at parity with the old two parties is increasing our numbers. And I think to some extent, the libertarian movement and party has been successful over the last 10 or 20 years. I don't know about you, Jacob, but I remember when I was in high school, nobody knew what a libertarian was. Today, and I'm not saying we're Coca-Cola or McDonald's or Walmart as a brand name, but when you have Stephen Miller calling us out by name, all these pesky libertarians are trying to shoot down the big bloated bill or just upset at us about whatever the case is.
Not to degrade the party or movement or anything, but now we can at least do like a Jack Sparrow thing where people could be like, oh, libertarians, like, you're the worst political movement we ever heard of. But hey, but you have heard of us. So
Exactly.
It's better to be hated and known than be unknown and people have no opinion about you. So
I want to be hated for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I'm not the Republican that smokes weed. I'm the one who wants to shoot down Trump's bill or whatever the case is. That's always fun.
I don't mind if I'm hated by warmongers and neocons. Like even like I was picking on LPNH, but one of my favorite tweets from them of all time was the one going after Meghan McCain on the anniversary of John McCain's death, which people say is in poor taste. And I'm like, yeah, but that's the point. Because it's meant to be like, there's a time, I think, to be a little bit crass and edgy, a little bit in people's face when it comes to things like war and the massive violence that states engage in, and to be like, oh, you don't like it when people are like belittling the loss of a family member. It's okay. What's your opinion on what Israel's doing in Gaza? What's your opinion on what America is doing in Iran, what they've done with Ukraine and Russia? It's just, these are the things you have to push. Like we have to be able to push people a little bit outside their comfort zones, I think, as libertarians, right? Not that to invoke a very unlibertarian metaphor to some extent, I think, because I agree, I think we have to be increasing our numbers, not just people in the party, but the movement, right? Mm-hmm. And there is a bit of a division of labor there. And I think people don't realize that it's almost like a good cop, bad cop kind of thing, right? You almost need the people who are going to really push the envelope and say the really radical, on the edge, borderline offensive rhetoric that gets people like, whoa, that's crazy. And then you get the more pragmatic types coming, oh, okay, listen, how about you meet me halfway here? Like a position that's still radical compared to the status quo, but that seems sensible compared to the really offensive tweet that New Hampshire or Dave Smith or someone put out there. So that's the way I think you kind of... Exactly.
Actually, you come out with the most outrageous thing. We're going to nuke Iran. And so, no, we're actually just going to we're only going to do this other thing that's only half as bad, or whatever the case is. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. No, you mentioned power and the pursuit of political power. This is something that libertarians are really, I think they're bad on it. And I understand why they're bad on it, right? Because we don't like political power. We envision a society where political power, you can describe it different ways, right? You could say it's abolished, or you could say it's privatized, or you could say it's decentralized. Tomato, anarchist, minarchist. Generally, we're in the direction of no to as little political power as possible, as decentralized as possible. But we don't live in that world today. And even just today, I was arguing with anarcho-capitalists on Twitter because I'm a libertarian. So, of course, I'm debating libertarians on Twitter. And they are people who I respect, who I know agree with me on my political philosophy, but they have this kind of like allergy to political action if they think if it compromises our principles, right? And I think that's one of the, maybe it's not the very sexy like divide within libertarian spaces, but it's one of the more fundamental ones because I think it speaks to the different strategies that get debated that the Mises Caucus and other factions have wanted to employ. That some people want to stick to what's easy and what's uncontroversial, and then some people want to, I guess, go on the far extreme in recent years. There's what Angela did with Trump, and in my mind, I'm like, there's probably some happy middle ground along all these different issues where we don't necessarily have to be playing it safe, but we don't necessarily need to be betting the entire farm each time either. And you have this thing in your profile, which I think people could read and take it a bad way, but you say Machiavellian, which I think people tragically misunderstand what Machiavellianism even is, because I don't think it's necessarily it can be a bad thing. Anything can be a bad thing, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. So I was interested to talk to you about that and ask what Machiavellianism is to you, why you thought it was important enough to put that in your bio, and how that pertains to politics and party politics, especially from the libertarian perspective.
Absolutely. No, it's a good question. So Machiavelli is a very interesting and very misunderstood man, in my opinion. He's somebody who was alive 500 years ago. He's been studied up and down. There's a lot of great authors that dissect Machiavelli, and of course his own work, The Prince, and others that he's done, The Art of War and The Discourses and Levy. But I got introduced to Machiavelli. I'm trying to remember if it was before or after I read The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. But Machiavelli, of course, was a precursor to a lot of Robert Greene's work and people who've influenced Robert Greene as well, R.G.H. Sue and others. And so for me, Machiavelli isn't this sort of dark triad figure. It's like a psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and something else. I forget what it is, narcissism perhaps. I actually view Machiavelli as somebody who is a realist. He separated political man from regular man. If you're engaged in the act of politics, you are a political man, you're engaged in the political sphere. And what he talked about, what he taught, was very much so regarding the political sphere and political reality. And for centuries before and even after Machiavelli, most politics had this kind of air of divine, or I'm doing something because I'm a noble, I'm of noble blood, or I'm elected this position, and so what I'm doing is righteous and based on the idea that I'm doing good or whatever. What Machiavelli really broke down is he exposed the man behind the curtain, and he exposed the elite for what they truly are. They're not noble, they're not righteous, they're not cut from a better cloth than the rest of us. They're ruling by power, they're ruling by greed, they're ruling by force. And he really exposed that. He did what Prometheus did. He took the fire from the gods and gave it to the people. He took the fire from the elite and he democratized it, so to speak. He put it into words and writing. And I think my theory is there's some that think that Machiavelli may have written The Prince as somewhat of with the purpose of exposing the elite. Here's somebody who was the secretary for Florence, and he was essentially ostracized by the next ruling elite that came in, the Medici family. And he wasn't able to participate in government again until the invasion by, I believe it was France, into Italy. And after that, his career tapered off, and he wrote the Prince in order to become relevant again. He wanted to attain a higher position in the Florentine government. He loved his country. He loved his state, rather. And he believed in ultimately a unified Italy. And when he wrote The Prince, he'd already been tortured. He'd already been ostracized, etc. He was going to actually dedicate it to one of the younger members of the Medici family, but instead he actually ended up writing it for one of the Pope's aristocrats or people, because he worked for the Pope at one point. And in any case, when you read The Prince or of his other work, he talks very close to reality. And I think that's something libertarians need to really understand. They need to understand power, not only to defend themselves from people that would use power against us, but also in order to employ it when necessary. If you need to know how to get what the result you're looking for, you should know how to get it. And I'm not saying you need to have flexible morality or whatever the case is. Don't do things you don't want to do, but know how to play the game so you can at least break the rules, understand how it's going to be used against you. Because in my humble opinion, I think politics is a lot like business and war. It's a very masculine dominated field. There's winners and there's losers, and it's a contact sport. So at least know the rules, at least know what's going to be used against you, understand human nature, understand the goal is power. And quite frankly, one of the things I learned is that everybody desires political power. From the time you're a baby and you want something, you want to know how to get it. My toddler, or not a toddler anymore, but my girl, she's 3 years old. If she wants something, she doesn't know how to get it. She'll ask me nicely. She'll ask mom. Maybe she'll cry. Whatever the case is, from the time we're born, want political power. The girl with blue hair at Starbucks wants political power too. Maybe it's becoming a victim and trying to gain some kind of sympathy. The guy with the baseball bat or the machine gun wants power too. So in all areas of life, you start to see the game of power being played out. But in 2025, we're much more political about it. This isn't 3,000 years ago when it was mostly taken by force. Yeah, I think it's a lesson we all need to learn. I think we should be wise about it as libertarians. Another good book I'm actually reading right now is one of the basis for the 48 Laws of Power is called The Craft of Power by R.G.H. Sue, which is a really interesting guy. He was alive during the 20th century, and he wrote this book, I think, in the late 20th century, around the 60s, 70s. So it's pretty modern. And that's a fascinating one, too. He talks about corporate power and political power in a more modern sense. And I think a lot of these authors give us a lot we can really take from it. And especially if you're a member of a political body or a board, you should be studying this stuff. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded, but if you have any questions or need any clarification, I'm happy to go into more detail or less.
Yeah, I find libertarians can sometimes fall into ideological echo chambers and feel like, listen, I love me Rothbard and Mises and Hayek and more contemporary ones like Hoppe and Bob Murphy and Steven Kinsella, who I had the pleasure of meeting just a few weeks ago at the Dave Smith, Alex Nowasta debate, two other good contemporary libertarians, right? Yeah, I'm a libertarian. I love reading libertarians. But there are non-libertarians who have insights into life, into politics, spirituality, our work, the earth, so many different subjects that are worth reading and listening to, even if you have strong disagreements with them. I've gotten a lot by listening to Jordan Peterson, who is someone that I am very critical of on his political views as of late, especially since he joined the Daily Wire and became more political because he used to stay more in his lane. But there's a lot there that I think that's important to both my personal life, my family life, but even my spiritual walk as a Christian. And I think there are some insights into how he talks about psychology and the idea of setting your room in order, and that part of something he says, which I think is actually has like a libertarian upshot, is that starting with that local, you have to figure out, you can't, he talks about how like you can't go out and try to correct society, but you have to start by figuring out what's right for you, and then what's right for you and your family, and then what's good and right for you and your family and your community. And it has to all be in tandem. And so what he's describing is the opposite of central planning. It's actually basically voluntarism in action and sort of social cooperation in action, that there's a lot of factors involved here. And you can probably barely manage to even just figure out what's good and right for you and your family. If you can go beyond that and figure out what's good for you and your family and your community, then you're really doing good. But to go much beyond that is, other than to point out what people are getting wrong, usually because they try to tell other people how to live their lives and try to centrally plan everything. Yeah, I think when it comes to Machiavelli and political power, I just feel like, yeah, like we're not playing a libertarian game. I think that's what libertarians get wrong. It's like, why would you, it'd be like if I was saying that like my favorite game, the best game, everyone needs to play chess. Like I really like chess. I started learning chess this last year. There's so many different ways to play chess, different strategies for if you're playing as black or white, different opening moves, different end game strategies and whatnot. And there's no two games are alike usually. If you know a little bit, you can play against someone who knows a lot. It's still, so there's a lot I like about it. But if, as much as I like playing chess, if then I have to go and play checkers, or I have to go and play backgammon, or I have to go and play some other game, it doesn't really help if my goal is like, oh, I want to go be playing chess, I got to play the game I'm playing. And politics, this world we're born into, this statist apparatus, it doesn't function according to libertarian norms. And so it seems, at the very least, a very big assumption on the part of many libertarians when they assume that there is a path to creating a libertarian society which includes no deviations from libertarian principles at any point. And I don't mean like libertarian principles initiating like mass violence against peaceful people, right? I don't mean like I'm not saying that there aren't lines in the sand, but that's where I think the Machiavellian aspect is useful, because I think you have to be able to think about it in terms of like game theory, right? And think about the goal should be, how do I move from where I'm at now to a position that's closer to where I want to be while violating the least amount of libertarian principles as possible. And that's the right game, because I think that there are diminishing returns because like means become ends to completely selling out your principles. But if your principles become an ideological prison that make it impossible for you to act, then that's not good either. So that's the way I view it. And I think from the way you're approaching it, I guess you would likely agree that that's the dilemma that we're facing on both sides.
I think so. I think number one, the purity spirals have to stop. I think if we have somebody coming into the movement who's new, who doesn't check off all the boxes right away, it's okay. Give them time. The more they're exposed to libertarianism, the naturally more pissed off and libertarian they're going to get over time. And of course, as far as the moves we make, absolutely. We can't expect every single thing that we do to be an absolute complete win. Now, on the flip side of that coin, we also have to be smart enough to understand where our actual allies are and where there's just transactions. You mentioned a few times Ross, and Ross was freed, and that's fantastic and amazing. And that's something that I think Lynn, Ross's mother, and Martha Bueno, I know, is involved, and my predecessor, Angela McArdle, and many people over the course of over a decade or so combined their effort to make this happen, and all the stars had to align the way they did in order for it to happen. So it was an impressive feat. It was pulled off. I think it's fantastic. Trump certainly came through on his promise there. Was there a libertarian in the cabinet? Was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that guy? Maybe. Was that the intent? I can't say for sure. I'm not sure if that was necessarily the intent or not. I think we were intending to get some other libertarians in the office, perhaps, but I'm glad at least somebody like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard can get a swing at it. But we'll talk about that maybe in a bit, see how that's going.
Yeah, that's Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah.
But I think as far as like the GOP goes, or even the Democrats for that matter, I think there's times where we could, and it's really state specific or even locality specific, if we've got a good relationship with a Republican or Democrat, or there's an opportunity there to work together on something, by all means, that's the decision you're going to have to make. But I think to confuse what was a transactional relationship with a real relationship is unwise. It's kind of like you go on a date with a girl and you think you're like married and together forever or something like that, or it's more than it is. It's not the case. I'd like to say we're not at the table if we're on the menu. And as far as I'm concerned, the Republican Party, once they're in power, they're really only liberty when convenient. I've seen that with guys and gals who joined the Republican Liberty Caucus. Best of luck to them, but I just haven't seen good results, at least not the results I'd like to see. And I think it begs the argument that the need for a third party is still there. The market is there. Yeah. It's a matter of building that up to a point where we have the political power, because until we really do have the political capital, and I understand this and I get this from a pragmatic perspective, there's always going to be a part of the liberty movement or the general population that is just, no matter how convincing and how right and how aligned with you they are, until you have that political power, you really don't have much to offer them. You can promise them down the road, or at the local level, you can gain that power. And of course, then you have something to offer them. But when it comes to the state and national levels, really the only thing we have is our pulpit. We only have our voice. We've got some influence. We have a voting bloc, technically, right? The whole thing was with Trump is he came to secure the libertarian voting bloc, which historically has gotten a few percentage points of the vote as the largest third party. Now with Chase Oliver, we only got, 0.5%, maybe less, 700,000 votes roughly in the United States. So it wasn't a good showing. I'm going to be honest about that. However, it was also unique circumstances for the time. Now, if we want to continue with our clout, if we want to continue with our influence, even if it's just rhetorical influence or to get Republicans and Democrats to move the Overton window more towards libertarianism, the next election cycle, we need that few percent of the vote. We need to beat the spread. So I think we need to be serious about running candidates at the national level. As a search and rescue mission, we're probably not going to get elected unless something happens, which is always possible. But the goal is to do better and better, and to keep seeking concessions from the other side. But I don't think a strategy of, let's say, running for office and then pulling out at the last minute is a good strategy. I don't think that even makes sense from a logistical standpoint. Once you're on the ballot, you're on the ballot. You can't always pull out. RF Kennedy Jr. pulled out and said, don't vote for me, vote for Trump. And he still did pretty well, all things considered. Ultimately, building our power is a long-term proposition. And it does involve understanding the nature of power and being willing to say, yes, that's something I want to wield. That's something that I think liberty needs, is people who wield power in order to defend it, and not being somebody who shies away from, hey, I have an opportunity to gain political power, I'm going to take it in order to do the things that we're talking about rather than just talking about it.
Yeah, I think, to put that in my own words, I think you should be open to just about anything, but you got to weigh the trade-offs of each particular proposition that's in front of you based on the context you're in. Because every election cycle, every primary, every 2 year, the midterms and whatnot, you're going to be in different circumstances, and you're not just going to be able to say there's always a one-size-fits-all approach to each part of that cycle that you're in, because every circumstance is different. Gary and Bill did well in 2016, but that's because at that point Trump was unknown and everyone hated Hillary Clinton. So that played a huge role in that. This time, even someone like Chase wasn't my preferred candidate, but even someone who would have been my more preferred candidate probably would have struggled, because it's the most important election of our lifetime. What hype was at an all-time high. And you even had Trump doing his best to appeal to libertarians. Even Harris was like last minute, like saying things about cutting taxes and whatnot in her platform. So it felt, and I think there's certainly, so on the one hand, I think there's the ideological prison, but if you just sell out your principles, then it's, hold on, if we need to be different than the Republicans and the Democrats, right? We can't lose our identity and our soul and what makes us libertarian. Otherwise, what are we building towards, right? I mean, because if all that matters is power, then you should just abandon the LP and go join the two parties that have power. So I think it's a balancing act. I think it's reading the terrain for what it is. And I think for all the ups and downs over the last 2 years with the Libertarian Party, I'm interested to see if perhaps there's been some lessons learned in all the different experimentation, and now we have maybe we have a map now of, we know what works in this direction, we know what works in this direction. A lot of what you've described here honestly resonates with me as someone who joined via the Mises Caucus, the Libertarian Party, and you're still doing issue-based coalitions like Defend the Guard. You're doing things like Decentralized Revolution, and you're open-minded about what can we do on the federal level, but we got to be careful because we have to be in a position to be actually getting concessions and not just being used and discarded later, which I think is entirely fair. So but on the flip side, one of the things I was critical about of the Mises Caucus, even though I was part of it for a long time, was that we did not do a good job at retaining and growing membership and donations and funds. And I think it's way too early to talk about who's going to run in 2028. But nobody good, whether you want a Spike Cohen or a Dave Smith or a Justin Amash or a whoever, right, to run, we got to start working. I'm sure this is part of your focus, is building the infrastructure to make the most out of whatever way you want to use the national campaign. You got to have the membership, the voting block, and the funds to really maximize that. And it seems like that's part of what the focus has to be, at least from the national perspective, probably over the next couple of years. And it seems like we're in the silver lining of all the garbage going on in the world right now is what I've said, because I'm one of the libertarians who's defected and voted Trump. But I said it this way, like, it was a gamble to see if, when all the cards were stacked in the favor more than ever before for Republicans to actually man up and cut government, will they come through? And we got a resounding no to that. like basically Doge was a giant waste of time. I'm happy it did some shining some light on things. You know that meme, like the trains running into each other, and it was like Doge and then Big Beautiful Bill comes in and cuts it off. And people are turning on Massey and Rand Paul, and so it's just so for me, I'm like, you know what, more than ever, I agree with what you said, and I listen. Godspeed to Mike Termat and the others who are going the RLC route. And LCI won't tell you how to vote or what party to join. But just me as a person, I'll tell you what I don't think you should do, which is I don't see any viable path towards squeezing any liberty out of the Republican Party, at least not from the inside. I mean, God bless Massey, God bless Rand, but I think we've proven once and for all that there is no solution within the two parties. There's some anarchists and ANCAPs who think there is no political solution. I'm a little unsure about that. But if there is one, it's definitely not in those two parties. I think it's with I think it'd have to be with a third party, so to speak. Steven, go ahead and give me your thoughts on that in terms of what...
Sure.
You can make this your sales pitch, right? Because we're talking about membership and donors. What do you think is the biggest call to action for people to take away from this conversation, and why they need to consider that perhaps they need to be exploring a different way to vote and to spend their dollars and volunteer time if they have it when it comes to politics, if they want to see something other than the same alternating red-blue trolley circus hellscape that we've all been living under for the last, I don't know, put 30, 50, 100 years.
Somebody on the LP social media team made like a GIF or something, like a meme, put it on Facebook, and it's just a trolley. If you can pull the lever, it just changes the color from red to blue.
So it's just on repeat, and the guy just sitting there.
It's just slowing down. And it's like the Republican and Democrat parties are at this point. Do you want BlackRock or Halliburton? You know, who, and realistically, it's actually both the same. Both, doesn't matter who you vote for, you're getting both. I was talking to Sally Mayweather, the guys on the Agorist podcast, and I said, like, why should we vote? Why should we vote? So if you're in a local election and you and a couple of your boys decide to run for office, wherever the case is, I've seen votes, very big votes, like tens of thousands of people in my county of 70,000 people that were decided by 3, 4, 5 votes, sometimes a single vote. But even just to go out there and run for office and be like, hey, now I'm on the city council. Now I've got a voice. If I get 2 more buddies in the city council, maybe sway another guy or 2 out here on the dais to come to my side of an issue, that's actual political power. That's change. That's what I'm talking about. That's something that we're trying to strive for, because you can make the biggest difference in your local community tomorrow. You can go show up to city council meetings, get you and 3 or 4 friends to talk 2 minutes each on an issue. I guarantee you, even in a larger municipality, you go and just show up and speak. And I don't know, let's say they're trying to ban plastic straws or something like that. You go up with buddies and speak for 5 minutes each, or whatever they allow. You're going to make a big difference in the minds of those city council members, and they might vote no on that. So if you're combing through, letting your voice be heard, getting known in your community, get involved. If you're a business owner, join your Chamber of Commerce. If you just want to get actively involved, join Knights of Columbus or the Rotary Club or something like that. But get actively involved. Let people know who you are, because going on X or Facebook or YouTube and having a podcast, that's great for all the other libertarians. No offense, Jacob. We're all guilty of this sort of online activism where, we get into our circle of friends, and that's fantastic, but we also need to extend that to our own local communities, because as libertarians, we have to understand is that the real power is local. The real power is reputation. The real power is who you know. It's your network. It's the people that get to know you locally. Now you have a voice. Now you have a say. Now people are coming up to you with issues, or you're going with them and they're listening, and you're getting more involved, and you're getting this clout. And then at some point, maybe you run for office, or even if you don't, you still have that influence. So through the Libertarian Party, I've met a lot of anarchists, and I'm one of them. I know people who are agorists or whoever who ask me, why should I get involved in politics? When you talk to these ANCAPs or whoever, what do they always talk about? Is politics. So at least at least if we're going to get engaged, let's get engaged in a meaningful way. Otherwise, I might as well just build the bunker now and just focus on that, which some people are doing, but I think most aren't. Most like to try to do both, build the bunker, make the farm, get in the community, et cetera, enjoy life. but also we want to be effective politically. And my stance as chairman of the party is I don't want our time and effort being wasted. I want it to go to something that is productive, that's efficient and meaningful. I want us to actually get results. And my promise to you listening is that I will do whatever I can as chair to move the party forward, to bring in membership, to bring in money in order to support candidates, in order to push legislation, in order to give us a larger voice, support affiliates, XYZ. All that requires money. And a $25 a donation goes a long way. A $5 or $10 a month donation goes a lot further because then we can actually budget things out. So if you head over to lp.org right now, sign up for the newsletter. At the very least, it's free. Consider becoming a member. 5, 10, 15, 25 bucks a month makes a big difference, believe me. Get a couple friends to do the same. We'll put your money in the right places. And you don't have to even change voter registration if you don't want to. You can become a Libertarian National Committee member. I would obviously encourage folks to become a Libertarian, but it's not needed if you don't want to. And join your local affiliate. See what races are coming up. Tomorrow, go on your registry for your city's website. Find out who the mayor is. Find out who the city manager is. Tell them you want them at a meeting with them. Talk about policy. Talk about issues that matter to you. We have all this power that we don't even know as Americans, as libertarians, that we don't realize we can exercise. And the real first step is not, yes, learn about the philosophy, learn about policy, connect with the libertarians, but ultimately take the first step to become an ambassador in your community and really spread the philosophy where it counts. Because I guarantee you, most people's first impression of libertarianism is not going to be Rothbard or Mises. It's going to be you, because you're the first person they've met who's a libertarian. So if you're a nice, sensible person who makes solid points and maybe they want to grab a beer with or grab lunch with or is very passionate or whatever, they're going to listen to you based on those grounds and say, that's a libertarian. I met a libertarian. Maybe I'm a libertarian. And I met a lot of people who've come to this side because of that. They met me. Maybe they meet someone like Jacob. They start to learn a little bit. They get involved. They get curious, interested. And that's really where the party grows, membership grows. That and a lot of technical stuff that we're going to get into with Archimedes that we're hoping to put a lot of dollars behind to really accelerate the growth of this party. But that would be my pitch. If you want to see political change, realize the cavalry's not coming. It's just us. The Republicans aren't willing to do it. The Democrats sure as hell aren't. And if we're going to be really serious about taking this country back, we've got to put the sweat equity in and start working from the ground up. So that's our plan. If you want to be part of the revolution, head over to lp.org, sign up, and that's my pitch.
Awesome. A lot of good stuff there. And I think just my final bit is that I've seen you do a pretty good job, I think, so far, coming in amidst a lot of turmoil, bringing some stability, talking to all the different factions and sides, and it's bearing good fruit so far. So keep up the good work. Everyone can, of course, go to lp.org to find out more about the Libertarian Party. And I just also 100% like it starts with us, just beyond even just the party, just the movement and increasing liberty in society. I do a podcast, but I also attend my church, and people at my church know Jacob's a libertarian. So when last year when the cycle was building up and I went to a church men's meeting, pastor sits down next to me, he goes, "So Jacob, who are the libertarians voting for this year?" I had a great opportunity to break down just all the different dynamics and to use that, not even just talk about the candidates, but to talk about, here's what libertarians are thinking about. Here's what we think about on all these issues and why we think that on all these issues. And that is so important. We have to, but as much as I think party politics is important, a little Christian spin I'll put on this at the end is that we as Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God, died for our sins. Yeah, he calls us to go out into the world, and we are his personal ambassadors for that gospel message. And I think that also applies to liberty, right? We know that liberty is what works, but we got to go out there. We got to put the work in to show that to other people. Steven, thank you so much for being here, and I hope to have you back on sometime, because there's a lot of meat left on the bones of the things we brought up to chew on some more. But this was a great first introduction, I think, to you and your vision for the party and the movement, and I just appreciate you making the time. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, for watching, for listening. Please, of course, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening on the audio later, 5-star reviews, whether it's Apple or Spotify or wherever, that always helps us and boosts this in the algorithm so that more people can see conversations like this one. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'll conclude, as I always do, by saying live at peace and live for Christ. Take care.